Hey guys, Matthew here, and today I want to bring you up the follow-up video on my last video of how to get to red maps in 12 hours. It seemed in the comment section that a lot of people didn't really understand the basics and mechanics of the atlas, so they didn't really know how to go from 8 watchstones to red maps, or how to go from 8 watchstones to all the watchstones. So this video is going to be basically a list of all the different rules of the atlas, all the different mechanics, and how to take advantage of them, and I'll finish off with an example with 2 regions of how to progress your atlas in the most efficient way possible. So the first rule of the atlas is that the golden thread, as you can see on here, basically is separating the regions. I think everybody knows that, right? So the maps within this part of the golden thread is Lex Proxima, this would be Lex Majoris, and so on and so forth. There's 8 different regions, 4 outer regions, 4 inner regions. The dotted lines between all the maps means that the maps are adjacent, which means anytime you run a map, anything that is, adjacent to it, which means connected by the dotted lines, can drop. And this rules applies even between different regions. So if I take, for example, primordial pool here, which is a tier 3, if I was to run a tier 3 primordial pool, what can drop out of it? Well, I can get Strand because it's connected to it. I can get Colonnade because it's connected to it, even if it's in another region, and the same goes for Phantasmagoria. So by running primordial pool, I can get access to basically 2 different regions that are outside of the map which I'm running. This is a very, very important mechanic to try to rush the outer regions to get the first 4 watchstones, like I mentioned in the video of how to get to red maps in 12 hours. The next thing you need to understand is that when you run a map, so for example, if I run Primordial Pool, well, these are not the only maps that I can drop. I can also drop any other completed maps between Tier 1 and Tier 4, and even Tier 5 when it comes to the boss. So when you kill any monster in a map, it has a chance to give you a map of the same tier. So any white monster in this primordial pool has a chance to give me any tier 1, 2, or 3 maps that I've completed or that is adjacent. So by running primordial pool, I could get waterways. Oh, yeah, I forgot about waterways. But I could get waterways because it's adjacent to it, even if it's not completed. But I could also get, say, Arsenal, even if it's not adjacent to it because it's completed. I could also get any tier 4 map, which is a +1 tier of the map, from any magic or rare monsters on the map. So I could get Phantasmagoria because it's adjacent and completed, but I could also get, say, Barrows because it's not adjacent but it's completed on my atlas. I would not be able to get Estuary because it's not completed on my atlas and it's not adjacent. And from the boss itself, I could get any tier 5 completed on my atlas because the boss can give you a +2 tier higher than the map you are running. So in this case, again, I could drop like Castle Runes, Chateau because they're completed on my atlas. There would be no adjacent T5 map because there's no way there's going to be an adjacent map that is 2 tier higher. So that is basically the baseline of the atlas that has been there forever. Those are the rule set. Now, the new rules is that, affects the Conquerors and the whole mechanics behind the Conquerors and the influence. So obviously, you cannot have the same Conqueror influence twice on your atlas. So it is possible to have 4 different Conqueror influences on the same time on your atlas, but you will never have the same influence twice. So for example, if I was working on this region here and it says that the yellow watchstone can be obtained, and I would also working on another region like this one, which also says that the yellow watchstone can be obtained, like this one, for example, Haywark Hamlet. If the yellow influence, a yellow Conqueror, was to spawn on Haywark Hamlet, it would never spawn on Lex Proxima, even if I was to run an infinite amount of maps, because that influence is already spawned on Haywark Hamlet. So that would be a complete waste of time. So that is something to note that is very important. On the same level is also that once a Conqueror is defeated, it will never spawn until all Conquerors are defeated and Cyrus is defeated. And then you get a reset button, if you will, to where you can go again. So right now, my my Crusaders defeated. So if I look at this region here, Lex Proxima, it says that the red watchstones is not obtained, but the Conqueror cannot spawn because the Conqueror is actually defeated. So before I defeat all the other Conquerors, or until I defeat all the other Conquerors and they're all defeated, and then I get access to my Cyrus, and I kill him, that will never spawn again. So there's no reason for me to ever focus on any of the regions where the red Conqueror isn't spawned, if I can't get any of the other watchstones either, because I would just be wasting some map completion. Or at least wasting some maps and time as well. So that is basically the base rule set of the Atlas and the base mechanics of the Atlas, as pretty much as simple as it gets. So now let's get into basically an example, and I'll do this example with two regions. I'll take Lex Ajoris and Lex Proxima, so we're going to forget about all other 6 regions of the Atlas for this example. I'm just going to focus on these two to try to get you guys to understand how you get to red maps as efficiently as possible. So you're going to want to start with an outer region. It doesn't have to be Lex Ajoris, it could be any corner that you want to start with. That is up to you. But I'm going to take in consideration that at this point you have 8 watchstones from doing what I said in the video yesterday, which is to basically rush the 4 outer watchstones, because before you do that you can't get the inner watchstones, and then get the 4 inner watchstones, which are very, very easy to get because of the T1 maps turning into T4 maps. So what happens next? Well, once you've done all these different watchstones that require you to basically have only one socketed watchstone, or even no socketed watchstones when it comes to the outer region, because the first Conquerors is where you get your first watchstones, so they don't require any watchstones themselves. The inner regions will require 1 watchstone each. How do you go from there? Well, you need to understand how the Atlas looks in terms of map tiers. So if I was to look right now on my Atlas, the tier 1s are in the middle, the T2 are right next to them, the tier 3 are pretty much all inside. There is a few T3 maps on the outer region of the Atlas, but then most of the T4s are on the outer region of the Atlas, and the T5s are only on the outer regions of the Atlas, and the T6s are also are not yet available. So how do I get into yellow maps? I need to get some T6s to appear on my Atlas. So what is the best way to do that? Well, considering that the outer ring is already up to T5, if I put a stone in there, that might seem like a good idea, but then I go straight to T7s. And how am I ever going to drop T7s if I don't have T6s, right? That doesn't make sense. So how do we do how do we go about trying to get into yellow maps where we're going to want to socket a watchstone in the inner portion of the Atlas? Now if we were to look, there's no longer any tier 1s on the Atlas. Well, remember that I'm only looking at these 2 regions. There's no T2s anymore. There's only a single T3 in the outer region. So if I run this, I'm more than likely going to be accessing T4s. If I do get access to T4s, most of them are the inside of my Atlas, or sorry, on the outside region. But there is one little straggler on the inside as well. But then this is where the switch gets interesting. My T5, which is my highest potential tier on the outer region of my Atlas, becomes available on my inner tier of my Atlas. So as I'm running these T5s, these T1 maps or T2 maps, if I unsocket this watchstone, for example, Fields is T2, Underground Sea is T2. Now if I socket the watchstone in, they become Tier 5 Fields and Arid Lake and all of these other maps, Haunted Mansion for example, they all become T5 from T2s or T3s or whatever they were, right? And they all basically go up in tiers. So now when I'm running these T5 maps, well, these T5s also have a chance to drop because they are completed on my Atlas. Even if I completed them as T2 maps, now that they have become T5 maps, T5 upgraded maps, they can drop as T5. So if I start dropping these as T5 while I'm running my outer region maps of T4, my T4s and T5s, so for example, all these maps that I'm running can drop me some T5s, so they can drop me these, but they can also drop me these. If they drop me the outer region T5s, and I run those, I have a chance of getting a T6. So I have a chance of getting the inner region T6s. Now, if I'm getting to where I'm starting to run some T6s, as you can see, the outer region of my Atlas no longer has any maps available. There's no T6s, it stops at T5s. So how do we get T6s to spawn in there? Well, we socket a watchstone. Now, if we look at T6s, most of them are going to be on the inner region of the atlas, but there is going to be one that was initially a T3 that becomes a T6. So as we're running these T6s, this T6 can also get a chance to spawn. As we're running these T6s and going towards the outer range or the outer circle of the atlas, we're going to get into some T7s. When we start reaching T7s, as you can see, there is just as many on the outer region than on the inner region. And now I'm sure you've guessed it properly, you've guessed it right. As we run these T7s, there's also a chance for T8 to drop because the outer region T4s now become T8s. So what happens, and the outer region T5s also become T8s. What happens is when we reach T8s, the inner region of the atlas no longer has anything available to drop because it's all T7 and under. All the T8s and above are actually in the outer region. So what happens is we put a second watchstone in the inner region. Now, if we look at T8s, it's the same cycle again. We have our T8s and a T9 and one single T8 on the inner region. If we were to look at T9s, what do you know? We have only shipyard, but then it gets access to the inner region back, and then we kind of work backwards. Back into T10s. Now there's no T10s on the outer region anymore. What do? We socket another watchstone. All of a sudden, there's some T10s on the outer region as well. We start working towards the outer region, get access into some T11s. T11s are almost exclusively on the outside of our atlas. So again, what do? We socket another watchstone in the inner region. Now all of a sudden, T11s are both on the outer region and on the inner region. And T12s, kind of the same situation. T13s only on the inside of the atlas because there's 3 stones. How do we fix that? We put a third stone in the outer region. All of a sudden, we have some T13s available on the outer region as well. And we're pretty much done, right? At this point, we're deep into red maps. T14s are available. How do we get more T14s? We socket the last watchstone in the inner region, and all of a sudden, we've got plenty of T14s, some T15s, and even some T16s. We're completed with the atlas. Now, of course, you won't be able to do this because there is going to be a lack of potential maps to really drop at this kind of speed. You're not going to be able to just ping pong back and forth between these two regions. But what you can do, though, is treat, well, actually, technically, you could, especially if you have the money to buy the missing maps once in a while, and that would be the fastest method of getting to red maps. Remember the video that I said why it's important to get these initial 8 watchstones, 4 of each colors, twice, is because it allows you to kind of socket 4 watchstones in 2 different regions, even if you ignore literally the rest of your atlas. So you could do this technically if you wanted to, and you could focus on 2 regions that make the most sense. So for example, I don't know, if you're trying to farm some burial chambers, that's going to be in Valdo's Rest. So you'd probably want to ping pong between Lyra Arthrain and Valdo's Rest. The only real issue is that Lex Proxima is also connected to Lyra Arthrain in a lot of ways. So your options are quite limited. This strategy that I just explained mostly works in the regions with a lot of different maps. So Lex Proxima and Lex Ajoris are 2 good regions to do so because they pretty much only work with each other. Lyra Arthrain is kind of set aside, and Valdo's Rest is completely out of question, and obviously the rest of the atlas doesn't matter. But for example, if we wanted to do this with New Vastir and Glenarch Carnes, it would also work quite well because Heroic Hamlet is kind of completely off guard, and same for Valdo's Rest. That being said, if I wanted to do this with, say, Heroic Hamlet and Tyrn's End, it could become problematic because Tyrn's End has a lot of different maps connected to Glenarch Carnes, and Heroic Hamlet also have some like little bit of connections going into close to New Vastir with the Glenarch Carnes. So you're fairly limited since your Heroic Hamlet can also go into Glenarch Carnes. So it's mostly going to be, say, like New Vastir and Glenarch, or Lex Proxima and Lex Ajoris if you really want to rush into those red maps. Now that is if you want to get to red maps as quickly as humanly possible. Now if you're a regular human being and you would like to complete your atlas as much as possible before you do that, what I strongly recommend is to do what I just did, right? Where you start on the outer region and then socket one inner region. You work on these 2 until you get to high yellow maps. Once you're in high yellow maps, which is going to be basically, I believe 3 watchstones is pretty much what it's going to be here. So T10s, T11s, Yeah, so basically high yellow maps, right? So a lot of T7s, a lot of T8s, a lot of T9s, a lot of T10s. So pretty mid to high yellow maps. Once you've done this, just go ahead and socket these same watchstones or do the same exact thing but in another region. So for example, we could go Hayward Hamlet and Tierns End and then do the exact same thing. A lot of T7 going on, a little bit of T8s, a lot of T9s, some T10s. And then you could do the exact same thing with New Vastier and Glenarch Carnes, which would also give you the same opportunity to go from T7s, T8s, T9s, T10s, and fill up your atlas to where you're getting as much completion as possible. So when you do get to red maps, they're easier to sustain. Now, hopefully, this video clears all misunderstanding and questions that anybody might have when it comes to the Atlas, because I honestly don't think I can make it any more simple. It is always just about working on two adjacent regions at a time if you really want to rush as fast as possible, because they basically go hand in hand and they complete each other to where when you start basically needing to go up in tiers, all you have to do is socket a watchstone, and since the maps are adjacent, they can already drop, and if they can't drop because they're not completed on the Atlas, well, so long as they're adjacent, they will be able to drop, remembering the rule set that I spoke about initially in the video. So hopefully that clears all a misunderstanding, and as always, I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons, Gaikona, Kfish, Casticus, Minicell, Luro for 20, Ramazan, Mr. Coffee, and Miner, as well as anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous, and anybody else who supports me on different platforms as well, and all of you beautiful people on YouTube. Hopefully you have yourself a good day, and that's going to be Matthew signing out. Until the next one. Peace.